Today, people around the world are commemorating the Holocaust on the 27th of January 2022. And I want in this video to share some of my thoughts and tell you about some of the encounters I've had with people who were in the Holocaust, friends that were in the Holocaust, and also some of the spirit contacts I've had from people who died in the Holocaust. So I'm not a Jewish person, but I am very interested in the topic because in my youth, in the 70s, about the age of 19, I went out to Israel and joined a kibbutz and was there just as a war was breaking out. I think that would have been the Yom Kippur War. And I met many interesting people there who had been Holocaust victims, actually. Living in the kibbutz really opened my eyes to what Judaism was all about. And it gave me a great admiration for the Jewish people on many different levels. Because we have a lot of separation in society today, don't we? And we see people that religions we don't understand or other cultures we don't understand. And we never really get close enough to them to really know who they are as people and how similar they are to ourselves, of course. And there was two people that particularly impressed me on the kibbutz, because the kibbutz was Ashdod Yaakov I went to, actually. And it was a kibbutz that had, it was an agricultural kibbutz. We were working from 3 o'clock in the morning cutting bananas. One hell of a lot of work. And it was a real pioneering type of early kibbutz, fantastic. Next to us was another kibbutz, which it now merged with, which they did have an arms factory on there, actually, so it got bombed. Well, it was bombed soon after I left. But anyway, I was very impressed by the people I met there, and in particular, there was two people I worked with. They were in charge of our group of people going out at 3 o'clock in the morning to cut bananas. And one was called Nammerie, I don't know their surname, and the other one was Alfred, or Alfredo, I think he might have been called Alfred. But Nammerie was sort of like a little tiny bloke, you know, little tiny man, and he would boss around Alfred, who was a huge great bloke, you know, a real gentle giant. He reminded me of someone from like out of the Steinbeck type of stories, because he was, you know, very kind but very gentle, but did everything Nammerie told him. So there's this little guy, Nammerie, Alfred, do this, do that, you know, all in Hebrew. And they were lovely characters. And I love those two people. They're really nice people, but on their arms, both of them had numbers on their wrists. I can't remember where it was, but they had the numbers tattooed on them there. And obviously they were once a number, and they, both of them, had survived Belsen. And I really don't know how somebody as gentle as Alfred, you know, drive the tractor as a real gentle giant, how someone like him ever survived. Nammerie I can understand because he was so tenacious and quick, but Alfred, I never know how he ever got through it all, or either of them. They must have been quite youngish, I imagine, when they were there. Probably, maybe they were children, but they were soft, gentle, kind, lovely people. And I thought, God, you know, how can a society throw such lovely people like this into such ghastly conditions, and not just them, but a whole race just for being Jewish, you know? And it makes you think, of course, doesn't it? And it hit me home hard when you actually know the people, you know. I remember in Israel with Nammerie, we used to go Hapsica, which means, you know, break, you know, because we were shattered, you know, it means break in Hebrew. And he'd say, and he'd say, Hapsica? No. In Belsen, we work all day and we work all night, you know. So they were very hard workers, but we could never keep up with them because they'd had that same work ethic that they were now, in many respects, replying to the kibbutz. So that was my encounter with it. And I think, you know, it's not until you see something yourself and get to know people, like with any group of people that you don't know, you know, when you get to know them closely, you realise there's no difference between any of us. And yet it's so easy in a divisive society, isn't it, to separate people and see them as something separate from us. And this is happening today. But I also had a very interesting other encounter with people from the Holocaust in another way. Because I've had a number come through, still got a bit of a croaky cough from the cold. Well, I've had a number of people come through when I've done mediumship. But the most interesting ones for me was when I went to the USA. I did a program over there called Nightmares Decoded. And on that show I would interpret dreams, and we'd film me interpreting the dream, and then right at the end I'd do some clairvoyance about that dream. So I'd give insights that nobody could know about, that were all in that dream, and I'd give a reading. Basically, if they dreamed about their grandmother, for example, I'd then do a spirit connection on their grandmother and things. So it was a really interesting show. I loved it. But afterwards I gave some reading. It wasn't on the show itself, but afterwards I gave some readings to some of the people who were on the set. And we were based in New York. We were based in the Jewish area of New York. And I had a number of people that came to me who were Jewish. I didn't know they were Jewish when I was giving them the reading. But I remember this one lady was a lovely lady, and she'd been a child, obviously, when all her family had been exterminated in the camps, and I remember giving a reading, and I was telling her the names, because it was so emotional, I suppose, a reading. I was getting it all right, 100%. I was giving the names of names of everybody that she knew that had died, and I was giving all the names of the people from the Holocaust. And she said, every one of those you've just given me, and you've given all the names of my family there, she said, every one of them died in the Holocaust, and she said, I was left alone, and as a child I was brought here to New York to make a new life, so it's really, for me, that was like being there, like experiencing it, seeing it through the eyes. Excuse me, I'll have a drink, I've got a croaky voice. Seeing it through the eyes of the very people that had died there, so for me that was a little bit of an insight about how horrible it must have been to slaughter all those people back in Germany. It all starts so easy. They started off, Hitler would say, first of all, we've got to have our living space. Now we need to get rid of these people that we don't need in the society of the Jews. Let's send them all back to Jerusalem. Let's send them all back to, let's make a new country for Madagascar. Oh, blow it. Let's kill the lot. Easy, one step at a time. And people gradually fall into these traps, didn't they? But are we not also perhaps even seeing today that history could perhaps repeat itself? They say history repeats itself. I mean, this is how Nostradamus, excuse my croaky voice, this is how Nostradamus made his predictions. He would look at the astrology from the past, compare it to astrology now, and say, well, that happened then, and now what could happen now? Oh, they had a battle of Hastings was then, so this battle could be now, and so forth. And we can look at history both in the stars and in our society and see so many similarities. And today we have many similarities possibly on the horizon to what happened in Germany. We have a lot of ethnic groups, and many people have resentment towards those ethnic groups, particularly because we've had mass immigration in the country, and all the countries of the world have had this. And what triggered Germany's position, really, in many respects, was the mass inflation that happened in Germany, and the recession, and the fact that the German people were completely humiliated by the First World War. The British fought to not give them a chance again, but and then we see the conditions where you've got a group you can blame who had riches, and are turning against people because there was an economic bankruptcy for everybody. Now, if we had a huge recession again now, what would happen? Who would people turn on? I think it's pretty obvious they turn on the smaller groups of people. It always happens. It happens every time because history repeats itself. I love history. I read a lot about history. Not just of my own country, but I love the history of India. I love the history of the whole world. There's so much to learn. I mean, I've read H.G. Wells's books about the history, all a bit out of date now, but really well written. And at the moment, I'm actually reading Churchill's books, the history of the English-speaking peoples. I picked up, I found it in some of my dad's old books, 3 volumes. It's a lot to get through, but fascinating. I mean, a lot of people don't realise Churchill also won a Nobel Prize for Literature. Could you see some of our politicians doing that? But we get a sense of how history is so important. For that man, history was really important. A lot of people now want to change history. That's what worries me. You know, we get fake history. Actually, Churchill's a good example, isn't he? Everybody wanted to paint him as being, say, for example, in favour of chemical weapons. They said, oh, what's all this about gas? He said, why shouldn't we use gas? You know, we can use gas on the Arabs. And people are twisted that to assume that he wanted to use chemical weapons. They weren't talking about, didn't realise he meant tear gas. You know, and also he was anti my hero Gandhi, you know, because he said, well, that Gandhi, he's no good. He's a politician. He was a lawyer that put on a dopey and became a holy man, but really he's a lawyer and he's doing it because he's clever. That's what Churchill said. Now I don't agree with that, but you know, it doesn't mean he's prejudiced and you should be tearing down his statues and things like that. So history gets twisted. History is often written by the victors, they say, but also history can slip away from us a little bit at a time, particularly if the people in schools don't read history, and history is not a main topic as it used to be in school. So I think it's very, very dangerous when we lose our true understanding of history. You won't get your history from Facebook. You have to read it. You have to read great books like that, or you have to read the ancient Roman writers on history and so forth. I mean, you learn so much about our own world from it, you know. So if we don't learn from these things and we start making fake history, because you know, I mean, you look at programs on television now and they change the agenda to make it all politically correct, and they change the agenda of history to make it look as if, you know, it always has been like this. You know, women were always accepted into society and we just deliberately overlooked them, or African people were in the court of Queen Elizabeth. You know, I mean, I'm nothing against anybody, but we don't change it. We have to see history as it was, for good and bad. It was both, you know, and we must learn from it. And if we make fake history, we get in another danger, because we blinker ourselves a little bit at a time. People are forgetting, are too scared to talk about these things. They're too scared to talk about it. And it means, well, I'm getting too croaky to talk about it actually, but it means that if we can't talk about these things, our democracy gets taken away a little bit at a time. And soon, people are too scared to talk about anything. And one day it could even get to the point where people could even get too scared to talk about the Holocaust. You know, because you've got Holocaust deniers out there and all sorts of horrible things. So we must look at our history with a clear head. History is a story. I know it can be painted in different ways, but we must, all of us, I think, learn from it, so that history does not repeat itself in the same ways it did before. And we don't whitewash the past or change the past to make it more comfortable to what we think today's values are. But we must try to understand it as it is. And if we don't, then all these horrible things like the Holocaust, they could happen all over again. Okay, I hope that's inspired you a little bit. I hope you found it interesting. I'm going to flog you something, actually. You might have read my new book. I keep pushing it, don't I? My new book, Be Happy. And that talks about, you know, we live in pretty troubled times, like I've just talked about there, and the predictions I make are often a little bit worrying and troubling. But actually, through all of this, there's a way through. We can be happy even in the hardest of times. And those people that came out of the Holocaust that I knew, actually, very happy people, which was, I think, the true victory, wasn't it? Okay, so if you want any details about my new book, have a look in the comments below. And I talk about Donald Trump in there too, and all sorts of things, and modern history and what's happening to us now. Okay, thank you for joining me. If you've never joined this channel before, I'm not normally as croaky as this, but please subscribe, and I'll see you again soon. Okay, bye for now.